Today I want to share with you 5 pieces of gear that make my production workflow in Studio One faster, more efficient, but most importantly, more fun. Okay, so kicking things off here, we have the Complete Control A25 by Native Instruments. This is actually a newer addition to the studio, and if you notice, before I used to have a Fader Port 16, I still think that's great, I still have it, but for a producer, I just think having keys in front of you is critical. Now, this is a 25 key version of their A series, which is their more budget line, and they do have a S line that has more features, but to me, this really did all that I needed it to do. The keys on this keyboard feel really good, but really the reason that I chose it is because it has a nice integration with Studio One that doesn't require anything else other than you just simply plugging it into your computer. So if you take a look here, we're gonna have the basic transport controls. We can play, we can stop, we can record, we can turn on the pre-count, which they call the count-in by holding the shift button. We could toggle our loop on and off. We could toggle our click track on and off. And here's the thing, you could also tap your tempo in. So if I go into this button here and I do 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see that it changed from 120 to 183 in my session. This is a really nice feature to have because I believe you don't even get that on the Fader port, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but this to me is really, really cool. Additionally, you also have an undo and redo function, and if you were to record something on here, let me show you really quickly. And I were to open up the editor, I can press the quantize button to automatically quantize those notes. There's a lot more things that you can do with this keyboard, including turning on automation, moving your playhead with this big knob here on the right, but I think the coolest thing is these 8 encoders up at the top. These 8 encoders get automatically mapped to the volume fader of 8 of your channels, and they are dynamic, meaning that they change depending on what you currently have selected. So let me show you here for a second. I'm gonna open up my mixer, and I'm gonna go ahead and you can tap on these and it'll tell you here on the small screen. So the first one is mapped to Scalar 2. If I move that, you can see it moving on the screen. Next one controls Arcade, Nexus, Serum, Analog Lab, Contact, Omnisphere, and then my keys and sense bus. And all of that happens automatically. I didn't have to do any mapping or whatever. All of this just happens for you. The only thing about these encoders though is that if you do have a larger session, it works in banks of 8. So if I wanted to control maybe my guitars, I'd have to click on the next channel. So as you can see here, and then go back to my first encoder, and I can control my guitar left, my guitar right, my acoustic guitar, lead, so on and so forth. But regardless, I think this is a really handy feature for anyone who just wants a complete solution to production in Studio One. Okay, moving on to piece of gear number 2, and that is going to be a first-party product by Presonus called the Fader port. Now, much like with the A25, this one comes in a bunch of different flavors. There's an 8 fader version and then a 16 fader version, which again, I do have, but by far the single fader has to be my favorite. Now at the core, this is another production controller and it shares a lot of similar features with the A25. However, because it is a first party product, the Studio One integration goes way deeper. So as you can see here, we have basic controls that other controllers would have, like transport controls and the click track, but you can also do more niche tasks like solo a track, mute a track, arm a track so that you can record, solo clear, mute clear, and even change between different channels in your session. There's way more things you can do with the fader port, but by far my favorite feature is this dynamic fader control. Now earlier I mentioned how the A25 has these dynamic encoders at the top that automatically map to the volume fader of your channels. And if you have smaller sessions, that might be all you need. However, if you run larger sessions like myself, and as you can see here on my template, things can get a little crazy, especially with the routing, this might not be the most efficient way to do it because you're kind of guessing what they're currently mapped to. I'd have to click on this and be like, okay, that's guitar left, but I don't want that, so let me open up the mixer, let me go ahead and click on. It doesn't really work that well for me in this scenario. What I prefer to do is use this fader port fader instead because it is dynamic and it automatically maps to whatever track I click on. So take a look here. Instead of trying to guess what these encoders are currently mapped to, I can simply click on a track. Let's do the Nexus here and then move the fader to change the channel. What about this Analog Lab? Let's click on that. And again, I can move this and change the volume. This to me is a much, much better workflow. Last but not least, the fader port also has a sort of secret feature because on the back, it has a slot to put in a foot pedal. Now you might be wondering, why in the world would you need some sort of foot pedal or sustain pedal on this thing? And well, here's the thing. You can actually map that foot pedal, that sustain pedal, to any command or macro within Studio One. So let me show you this. If I go over to the external devices window on the top left here, I can drop this menu down and then click on fader port. Once you get this pop-up window, you can see that you also have the ability to see what the F functions are currently mapped to. In my case, they are currently set to the inspector, editor, console, and browser, and you can remap these. But what I'm interested in is this last button on the far right. This button labeled FS stands for foot switch, and you can right click on this and hit assign command to look through whatever native command Studio One has available or whatever macro you've programmed, and then assign it to this area, which now lets you activate it or trigger it through the foot switch. So usually what I do is I have this set to a macro that I created called a redo recording that I use often whenever I'm recording guitar. Often whenever I'm recording guitar, my hands are obviously busy, and sometimes I don't want to record the takes into layers. Sometimes I just want to do it over and over until I get it right, and that is what that macro allows me to do. Whenever I press record here on my fader port, it'll start recording, but if I mess up, instead of having to stop the recording, go back, delete, record again, I can just simply press the foot switch and it goes right back to the starting point and starts to record again. And I can do this as many times as I want. It's just really, really convenient for something like this scenario. Anyway, to me, the fader port is an essential piece of kit for anybody really, because it works with more than just Studio One, but specifically if you own Studio One because of that deeper integration. Speaking of Studio One, I personally find that this software is one of the most intuitive, if not the most intuitive on the market. However, I also understand that it can be overwhelming if you are just starting out. Well, friend, I'm happy to let you know that I actually have a free Studio One workshop that walks you through the basics and gets you caught up to speed. The workshop is about 30 to 40 minutes, and as I mentioned, it is completely free. So if you want to get access to that, go ahead and click the first link down below. But okay, moving on to item number 3, that is going to be my Logitech MX Master Mouse. Now hear me out, I know people love their trackballs, but personally, in my opinion, this thing is superior for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I just think this is way more ergonomic. This kind of puts my hand in a natural position. It's not tilted inwards. It's at a natural position that lets me grab the mouse, and to me, it just feels better than the trackball. On top of that, it also has 7 customizable buttons that, you guessed it, can be programmed to any native command or macro in Studio One. So if you take a look here, we obviously have your normal left and right buttons, but the scroll wheel is also a button. There's a little button below that, which you can also customize. There is a thumb button. There is 2 side buttons here, and then a side scroll wheel, allowing you to do a bunch of different things. Bringing it back to Studio One, let me show you really quickly what I usually customize this to. So if I go ahead and create an empty MIDI track, I can use the scroll wheel button to basically create a loop around that event and then turn it on. So as you can see here, that happens. If I were to extend this a little bit more and then click it again, it highlights that region and then toggles that loop. Really, really handy. The button below that, the little one, just simply goes back to 0. So if I were to maybe be here on measure 11 and I want to hear the song from the beginning, I just press that button and it goes right back. The thumb button is an indispensable one for me because I have this mapped to the delete key. Instead of having to move my hand from the mouse to the keyboard to basically delete something, I just press the thumb button and it literally gets rid of it. So easy. Right above that thumb button, I also have 2 more buttons, and the first one I have it mapped to toggle the mute for different events. Sometimes when I'm in a session, I don't want to mute the entire track. Sometimes I just want to mute a single event. And that's what this button allows me to do. Whenever I click on an event and then click that button, it allows me to mute that. So if I were to duplicate this here, you can see that whatever I click on, it's going to mute. And this is incredibly handy for situations when maybe I'm creating drops or something of that sort. The button above that, I actually don't have it mapped to anything at the moment, although I'm sure I'll find something in the future. And then obviously the side scroll wheel allows you to scroll your session horizontally. The best part about this mouse for me though is that all these extra commands and buttons are literally at your fingertips because I can access them without moving my hand at all. Oftentimes with the trackball, I found that if you want to activate certain commands or macros, you have to press buttons that are over the trackball or to the side, which just rotates my wrist in a weird sort of way that for me at least causes pain. So having this be static in one place and still being able to access everything is a game changer. All right, moving on to item number 4, that is going to be my Elgato Stream Decks and my Elgato foot pedals. The Elgato Stream Decks are basically another macro pad with 15 buttons that you can assign to a bunch of different things in Studio One. I truly believe that the key to mastering any DAW, not just Studio One, is number 1, obviously putting in the time to learn it, and then number 2, understanding, using, and customizing keyboard shortcuts to have this be catered to your specific workflow. The problem for me though is that I now at this point in my career, specifically knowing the software in and out, have more shortcuts that I can map to my keyboard or honestly that I can remember. So for me, honestly, instead of trying to guess or remember what I set a certain command to here on the keyboard, I can simply look over to my Elgato Stream Deck and it'll give me a button with a predefined label that will do the task that I wanted to do. So if you take a look, this here is my Studio One profile for my Elgato Stream Deck, and basically what happens is I have a couple of different apps here that are useful, like the Splice app, which it'll open. It'll also open up the UAD console, but also at the top, if you notice, I have 3 different buttons that cater to my 3 different workflows: production, recording or engineering, and audio editing. So if you click on one of these here, let's just choose production, you can see that I have a bunch of other different tasks that I can perform with a single button click, including duplicating a VST without events, removing a VST, converting the MIDI to audio, the audio to MIDI, showing the files tab on the browser in case I want to bring in some loops, and much, much more. I really, really love these products, and as a matter of fact, I have 4 in total. I have a regular Stream Deck here. I also have a Stream Deck Mini that I use to navigate my computer. So this one I'll basically use to navigate to a specific folder, maybe finished projects, unfinished ideas, beats, whatever. And then I also have 2 foot pedals that allow me to do more things with my feet. So as you can see, I am addicted. As much fun as these things are, they can get a little complicated. So if you are interested at all in this whole Elgato stream setup, let me know and I can make a video walking you through my specific setup, my commands, and help you do it for yourself as well. But okay, last but not least, the 5th item on this list is going to be another first-party product by PreSonus, and that is the Atom. Now, if I'm being honest, the Atom is really just another MIDI controller, and I can do everything that does with either my fader port, the A25, or my Logitech mouse. But the reason I have it is that sometimes when I'm producing, and specifically when I'm programming drums, I would rather just tap things out on a pad, and especially if I want a more human feel. Nonetheless though, it is still a full-blown Studio One controller because it allows you to stop, play, record, enable the click track, and all of those basic tasks. So maybe this could be the solution for you if you just want something that is more pad focused. I've actually done a full breakdown and review of the PreSonus Atom, so if you want to see that, go ahead and click right over here.